Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the surprising philosophical roots of our modern environmental crisis, and we're going to explore how some ancient concepts could actually be a viable blueprint for our survival. We hear about climate change, resource depletion, and ecological collapse every single day, right? But we rarely trace those physical problems back to the underlying thought systems that built our entire global economy. And why do philosophical roots matter? Well, because the smokestacks, the supply chains, and the policies causing climate change didn't just build themselves. They were born from a very specific set of ideas about humanity's relationship with the Earth. So we're going to explore how a massive shift in how we view community, property, and the literal flow of our actions could be the absolute key to rebalancing our world. Let's dive right in.
It is literally the ultimate paradox of modern human history. We have achieved totally unprecedented economic abundance. We've built towering megacities, sprawling global supply chains, and agricultural systems capable of feeding billions. Yet this exact success has brought us right to the edge of an extinction-level ecological disaster. We're talking mass species die-offs, rapidly destabilizing climates, and severely depleted natural resources. The very machinery that made us prosperous is now systematically dismantling the biosphere we rely on to breathe and eat. So how did winning the material game become the exact thing that might take us out? That is the core question we are going to unravel today by looking at the philosophies that got us here.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the modern environmental paradox, move into the structural limits of Western communitarianism, explain flow-oriented communitarianism, introduce Dotong Jingyeong as a new alternative, check out some practical historical cases, and finally look toward a sustainable future. Section 1. The modern environmental paradox. Let's start with the root cause of this crisis. Early economic development actually had a completely noble goal. During the early days of industrialization, the primary aim was to create a better life for everyone and lift the human community out of poverty. But in that aggressive linear race for wealth, we kind of left nature completely out of the group chat. The systems we established viewed the natural environment not as an active, living participant, but just as a static backdrop, like a limitless warehouse of raw materials to be extracted. We gained immense economic abundance, sure, but by totally isolating human progress from ecological health, we trapped ourselves in a terrifying contradiction. The very financial systems we built to thrive are now directly threatening our long-term survival. Section 2. Limits of Western communitarianism. To understand how to fix this, we need to look at what went wrong structurally. The source analysis points out that the blueprint of Western communitarianism wasn't inherently malicious, but it had a fatal structural flaw, a total lack of a cyclic perspective. Because it didn't view the world as an interconnected, circulating system where everything eventually returns to its source, it treated nature like a giant ATM that required absolutely no deposits. Furthermore, in its rush to elevate the concept of the community or the nation, it often ignored the nuanced value of the individual, focused almost entirely on linear material development, and effectively isolated humanity into a self-serving bubble. This foundational philosophy fundamentally disconnected human progress from ecological harmony. Section 3. Flow-oriented communitarianism explained. Okay, so what is the fix? The source text points us to a brilliant alternative. Within Daesun thought, a modern Korean new religious and philosophical movement, we find the concept of yuhang, which translates roughly to flow-oriented communitarianism. And this is the total opposite of that hoarding, linear mindset of the West. Instead of stagnant, isolated material growth, this philosophy champions a profoundly philanthropic view of wealth. It envisions a cyclic economy built entirely on giving, where goods and resources are recognized as the result of continuous, universal circulation. In this framework, wealth isn't a stockpile to be locked in a vault. It's a current meant to move. If a person or corporation generates excess, the natural, healthy function of that excess is to circulate back out, to benefit both the broader community and the environment that provided the raw materials in the first place. And this is absolutely crucial. As long as the flow between the individual and the community isn't blocked by greed or hoarding, the human desire to give naturally bubbles up. When the system functions correctly, individuals voluntarily use their resources for communal ends because they recognize their deep interconnectedness. And because this entire framework is built on continuous circulation rather than just extraction and abandonment, it inherently protects and harmonizes with the natural environment. You take what you need, and you ensure your output nourishes the system for the next cycle. Section 4. Dotong Jingyeong. New alternative.
This brings us to the core mechanism for our survival. This concept takes that flow to the next level. Dotong Jingyeong isn't just abstract philosophy, it's an ethics of actual care. It denotes a state of circulation where multiple systems interact through continuous, unimpeded flow. But unlike traditional utilitarianism, which usually just ends up benefiting a powerful minority, this philosophy specifically aims at reconciling the strong minority with the weak majority. To ground this in reality, think of the strong minority as highly industrialized sectors, powerful corporations, or ultra-wealthy demographics. The weak majority represents vulnerable populations, developing regions, and even the exploited biosphere itself. This concept argues for a system that actively meets the demands of both groups simultaneously. So, by restoring this principle of cyclicity and overlapping mutual care between the strong and the weak, we create a truly sustainable loop. Everyone becomes part of an interconnected, flowing system. The most profound insight here is that nature is the ultimate weak majority that we must reconcile with. Humanity holds immense technological power, making us the strong minority relative to the defenseless ecosystems we harvest. But we naturally pursue harmony with nature under this philosophy because, well, you literally cannot poison the environment without directly disrupting the very flow that keeps you alive. If you destroy the soil, the community starves, and the individual perishes.
Section 5. Practical cases in harmony. Philosophy can get pretty dense. So let's ground this in reality and see how these concepts actually played out historically. According to the source texts, this kind of transformation starts with bold leadership and personal sacrifice. The texts highlight Songji, the presiding historical figure in Daesun thought. He didn't just theorize about flow and circulation, he actively demonstrated it by literally selling his own property to distribute the proceeds to beggars, famously stating, "I must first set the example." This single, powerful act of sparking flow deeply inspired members of the Jingyeong, a historical group that had been known for disruptive and plundering behaviors. Seeing this example, they actually ceased their hoarding and began using their own wealth for the benefit of the community. That is ideological circulation in real practical action. We see this exact same principle applied to social justice in the historical case of a figure named Jingyeong. In this instance, a local community was deeply fractured by severe, rigid social hierarchies that blocked any sense of mutual care. The deep discord in the community was turned into powerful reconciliation by establishing that right and wrong are based purely on a person's actions, not their inherited societal rank or accumulated power. It was a massive systemic equalization that removed the arbitrary blockages between the classes, allowing fractured relationships to heal and social capital to flow smoothly once again. This brings us to a really foundational truth explored deeply in the texts. Words are the cry of the mind, and our deeds follow a strict principle of circulation. What this means in a modern context is that every single choice, whether it's an industry dumping waste into a river for quick profit or a community investing in green energy, sets off an inevitable chain reaction. Whatever energy, greed, or generosity we put out into the world absolutely circulates and comes right back to us. We literally cannot separate our daily actions or our economic policies from their long-term ecological consequences. Section 6. Toward a sustainable future. Let's synthesize these ancient concepts into a modern blueprint. Here are the core takeaways. The source argues that to halt our current trajectory of environmental degradation, society must move away from the stagnant, linear limits of traditional Western economic models. We critically need to adopt a cyclic view of goods and wealth, completely grounding our broader economy in the principles of Yuheng, or flow. By prioritizing continuous giving and resource circulation, Daesun thought provides the exact ethical framework our capitalist society desperately needs to move past individual selfishness and correct our ecological course. The theoretical foundation we've discussed today is incredibly solid. But the real work is taking these concepts of Dotong Jingyeong and developing a contemporary community model that practically responds to the global environmental crisis. What does integrating Dotong Jingyeong look like today? It looks like designing cooperative local economies. It looks like implementing sustainable circular resource management, where the waste from one industry literally becomes the raw fuel for another, eliminating the whole concept of ecological dead ends. We have the philosophical map, now we just have to drive the car.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Fixing the planet doesn't just start in massive international summits. According to these principles, it starts by fixing the stagnation and blocked flows in our own backyards. So I challenge you. Find what you can personally give or circulate. What flow can you unblock to restart the cycle of mutual care in your community today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.